Blood stained the dust of the auction platform as Eleanor Blackwood struggled against her binds, the coarse rope cutting into her wrists and neck. It was 1873 in El Paso, Texas, and human decency had abandoned this corner of the frontier as surely as the rain had forsaken the cracked earth beneath her feet. 500 for the schoolteacher, bellowed the auctioneer, a man whose belly protruded over his belt buckle like a testament to his prosperity built on others' misfortune. Educated, can read and write, good for your children or whatever else you fancy. The crowd's laughter cut through Eleanor like a knife. 6 months ago, she'd left Boston with dreams of bringing education to the frontier. Now, her credentials meant nothing. She was merely merchandise, sold to cover the debts of the school board chairman who'd embezzled the town's funds before disappearing into the night. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure moved forward. Dust clung to his denim pants, and the brim of his hat cast a shadow over eyes that had seen too much of the harsh realities of the West. Hank Keller didn't speak as he approached the platform, his spurs jangling with each deliberate step. 500 going once, the auctioneer continued. 700, came a voice from Eleanor's right, a man whose reputation for breaking his ranch hands was exceeded only by his cruelty to women. Eleanor's heart sank. She'd heard whispers about Randall Morgan's ranch. No woman had ever left it alive. 700 going once, going twice, 1,000, said Hank Keller, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. A hush fell over the crowd. The price was steep enough to buy a decent parcel of land. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed. Sold. To the gentleman in the back. Hank Keller climbed the steps of the platform, ignoring the curious stares. Without ceremony, he drew a knife from his belt. Eleanor flinched, certain she'd only exchanged one form of death for another. Instead, he sliced through the rope around her neck in one swift motion. It fell to the wooden boards with a soft thud. "Never again," he said quietly, for her ears alone, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were the color of the sky after a storm, clear blue with flecks of steel gray. No person should wear the mark of ownership. Stunned into silence, Eleanor could only stare as he cut through the bindings at her wrists, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "You're free to go, miss," he said, stepping back. "The debt is paid." "Free," she echoed, disbelieving. Her voice cracked from disuse and fear. "But you paid not for you," he clarified. "For your freedom, there's a difference." The auctioneer stepped forward, his face pinched with confusion. "Now see here, Keller. The lady is legally yours. No person can be legally another's," Hank replied, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "The war settled that, or have you forgotten? This is a contract debt," the auctioneer protested. The law permits many things it shouldn't," Hank replied, turning his back on the man. To Eleanor, he said, "My horse is hitched outside if you'd like an escort out of town, miss." "Blackwood," she supplied automatically. "Eleanor Blackwood," he nodded once. "Miss Blackwood." Eleanor hesitated. Her options were limited. She had no money, no home, and the town that had once welcomed her now viewed her as either property or damaged goods. "Why?" she asked simply, unable to comprehend his motives. Something flickered across his face, pain, perhaps, or memory. "Because someone once did the same for me," he answered after a moment. "And because it was right." The crowd began to disperse, grumbling about the unexpected turn of events. The auctioneer counted his money, evidently satisfied despite his objections. Eleanor took a tentative step forward, then another, feeling the ground beneath her feet as if for the first time. Freedom tasted different when you'd come close to losing it. Hank Keller didn't rush her. He waited at the edge of the platform, offering a steadying hand as she descended the steps on legs that trembled from standing too long. "I have nothing," she confessed as they walked toward his horse. "No way to repay you." "I didn't ask for payment," he replied simply. His horse, a handsome chestnut gelding, whickered softly as they approached. Hank untied the reins and gestured for her to mount. "Where will we go?" Eleanor asked, suddenly aware of the vastness of her uncertainty. "I have a small ranch about 10 miles east," he replied. "My sister Bethany keeps house there. You're welcome to stay until you decide what's next." He paused, then added, "No strings, Miss Blackwood, just a safe place." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, this stranger who had spent $1,000 to free her with apparently no expectation of return. In Boston, she'd have called such behavior suspicious at best, but something in his steady gaze told her she could trust him. "Thank you, Mr. Keller," she said finally. "I accept your hospitality." He nodded once, helped her mount, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of El Paso, Eleanor felt the town's shadows receding. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility, something she'd thought lost forever when they put that rope around her neck. The desert landscape stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful in the late afternoon sun. Eleanor had never ridden double before, and she tried to hold herself stiffly, aware of the impropriety of their position. Yet as the horse settled into a steady rhythm, she found herself relaxing marginally. "May I ask what brought you to the auction, Mr. Keller?" she ventured after a while. There was a pause before he answered. "I was in town for supplies, heard talk at the general store, and you decided, just like that, to intervene. Some decisions don't require much thought, Miss Blackwood." The simplicity of his answer silenced her for a time. They rode on as the landscape changed, subtly more vegetation appearing as they followed a small creek eastward. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in dramatic shades of orange and purple. "I came west to teach," Eleanor said finally, feeling she owed him some explanation. "The school board chairman, Mr. Haynes, embezzled the town's money. When he disappeared, they decided I was somehow complicit, or perhaps just convenient." "Jasper Haynes," Hank said flatly. "Man couldn't look you in the eye when speaking. Should have been their first clue. You knew him." "Knew of him? El Paso's not big enough for secrets to stay buried long." He paused. "Except apparently his theft." Eleanor nodded, though he couldn't see her face. "They gave me a choice: work off his debt or face charges of conspiracy. I refused both, so they—" Her voice faltered. "They found a third option," he finished for her. "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. They crested a small rise, and Eleanor saw a modest ranch house nestled against a backdrop of rugged hills. A barn stood nearby, and fenced pastures held a small herd of cattle. It wasn't grand, but it looked well-maintained and peaceful. As they approached, the front door opened, and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was tall, like her brother, with hair the color of wheat tied back in a practical braid. "Hank," she called, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "You're back early, and with company." Hank dismounted first, then helped Eleanor down, his hands strong around her waist. "Bethany, this is Miss Eleanor Blackwood," he said. "She'll be staying with us for a time. Miss Blackwood, my sister, Bethany Keller." Bethany's eyes widened slightly, taking in Eleanor's disheveled appearance and the raw marks on her wrists where the ropes had been. But to her credit, she asked no immediate questions. "You're most welcome, Miss Blackwood," she said instead, coming down the steps. "You must be exhausted. Come inside, I've just put supper on." The interior of the ranch house was modest but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid table, several chairs, and a small sofa near the fireplace. Doorways led to what Eleanor presumed were bedrooms. "Sit, please," Bethany said, gesturing to the table. "I'll fetch an extra plate." Hank removed his hat, hanging it on a peg by the door. Without it shadowing his features, Eleanor could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind. A scar ran along his jaw, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. "The back bedroom is yours while you stay," he said, nodding toward one of the doorways. "It's small but private." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, still feeling somewhat dazed by the rapid change in her circumstances. "Mr. Keller, Hank," he corrected gently. "Just Hank. Too many Kellers around here otherwise." Bethany returned with an extra plate and utensils. "I hope you like rabbit stew, Miss Blackwood. It's what we had planned." "Eleanor, please," she responded automatically. "And yes, anything would be wonderful." As Bethany served the stew, accompanied by fresh bread still warm from the oven, Eleanor realized how hungry she truly was. She'd been given only minimal food during the 3 days she'd been held before the auction. They ate mostly in silence at first, until Bethany finally spoke. "Not to pry, but might one of you explain?" Hank glanced at Eleanor, clearly leaving it to her to decide how much to share. "I was a schoolteacher in El Paso," Eleanor began, setting down her spoon. When the school board chairman embezzled funds and disappeared, they held me responsible for his debts. Today they were selling my contract to the highest bidder. Bethany's face paled. They can't do that. The war ended such practices. Not officially, Hank said grimly. They called it a debt servitude contract, but they had a rope around her neck all the same. Bethany reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. You're safe now, and welcome to stay as long as you need. Thank you, Eleanor said, emotion making her voice unsteady. But I can't impose indefinitely. I need to find work, repay your brother, there's no debt between us, Hank interrupted firmly. $1,000 is not nothing, Mr. Keller. Hank, Eleanor insisted. Even I know that's a substantial sum. He met her gaze steadily. Consider it an investment in justice, then. Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Eleanor was too exhausted to press further. After helping clear the table despite Bethany's protests, she gratefully accepted the offer of a bath. The small washroom off the kitchen contained a copper tub that Bethany filled with heated water. She also provided a clean nightgown and robe. They're mine, so they'll be a bit long, she apologized. But clean, we can see about getting your things from town tomorrow. I have nothing in town, Eleanor admitted. Everything I owned was seized. Bethany's expression hardened momentarily. Then we'll make do, I have plenty to share. Left alone, Eleanor sank into the warm water, letting it soothe her aching body. As she washed away the dust and fear of the past days, she wondered about the Kellers. What had prompted such generosity toward a stranger? Hank had said someone once did the same for him. What did that mean? Clean and dressed in the borrowed nightclothes, Eleanor found her assigned bedroom simply furnished but comfortable, with a narrow bed, small table, and a chest for clothing. A window looked out toward the hills, now silhouetted against the night sky. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. That morning she'd awakened in a jail cell, certain her life was over. Now she was clean, fed, and safe, all because a stranger had decided her freedom was worth $1,000. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she called. Bethany entered, carrying a small jar. For your wrists, she explained, indicating the salve. And your neck, it will help with the healing. Thank you. Eleanor accepted the jar. You and your brother are very kind. Bethany sat beside her on the bed. Hank doesn't talk much about his past, she said after a moment, but I know why he couldn't ride past that auction today. She hesitated. Our mother was sold, you see, before the war. She was a house slave in Louisiana. Our father purchased her freedom, married her, and brought her west. Eleanor's eyes widened. I had no idea. Few do. We can pass for white, and out here that's been easier. Bethany looked down at her hands. Our parents died in a fever epidemic 10 years ago. Hank was just 20, but he kept this place going, raised me himself. I'm sorry for your loss, Eleanor said softly. Bethany nodded. What I'm trying to say is, when Hank saw you today with that rope, he wasn't just seeing you, he was seeing our mother and all those like her. I understand, Eleanor replied, though in truth she couldn't fully comprehend the depth of such a legacy. Get some rest, Bethany said, standing. Tomorrow will be a new beginning. Left alone again, Eleanor applied the salve to her raw skin, wincing at the sting before the herbal mixture began to soothe. As she settled into bed, exhaustion quickly pulled her toward sleep. Her last conscious thought was that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found safety in this unexpected corner of the world. The next morning, Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, the events of the previous day seeming like a strange dream. But the tender skin at her wrists and neck confirmed the reality. She dressed in clothes Bethany had left for her, a simple skirt and blouse that were slightly too large but clean and serviceable. After quickly braiding her hair, she made her way to the main room. Bethany was at the stove, turning bacon in a cast iron pan. Good morning, she greeted warmly. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in weeks, Eleanor admitted. Thank you again for your hospitality. Sit, please. Coffee's hot and breakfast is nearly ready. Bethany gestured toward the table. Hank's already been out since dawn. He'll be back shortly. As if summoned by his name, the door opened and Hank entered, bringing with him the scent of morning air and horses. He nodded a greeting to Eleanor, hanging his hat on its customary peg. "Morning," he said simply. "Sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." Eleanor found herself suddenly shy under his direct gaze. Breakfast was a quiet affair, but not uncomfortably so. Eleanor learned that the ranch, while modest, was self-sufficient. The Kellers raised cattle primarily, but also kept chickens, a vegetable garden, and hunted to supplement their needs. "I was thinking," Bethany said as they finished eating, "Eleanor needs some things of her own. Perhaps we could ride into Carson's Creek later. It's smaller than El Paso, but the general store is well stocked." Hank nodded. "Good idea. I need to check some fencing on the north pasture, but I could drive you in the wagon after that." "I don't wish to be any trouble," Eleanor began. "No trouble," Hank assured her. "Need to pick up a few things myself." After breakfast, Eleanor insisted on helping with the dishes despite Bethany's protests. As they worked side by side, Bethany spoke of life on the ranch and her brother. "He works too hard," she said, glancing out the window where Hank could be seen loading tools into a saddlebag. "Always has, especially since Pa died." "No thoughts of marriage for either of you?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." But Bethany didn't seem offended. "I was engaged once 3 years back. Thomas Hayes from over Marfa way. He died of typhoid before the wedding." Her voice held old sorrow, well contained. "As for Hank, he's had offers. Half the unmarried women in 3 counties have set their caps for him. But he's never seemed interested." Eleanor watched through the window as Hank mounted his horse and rode toward the northern edge of the property. There was an inherent grace to his movements, a quiet confidence she found compelling. Later that morning, Eleanor explored the immediate surroundings of the ranch house. The garden behind the kitchen was well tended, with neat rows of vegetables and herbs. Chickens scratched contentedly in a fenced yard, and a milk cow dozed in a small paddock. She was sitting on the front porch enjoying the breeze when Hank returned shortly after midday. He dismounted, led his horse to the water trough, then approached the house. "Ready to head to town?" he asked, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "Yes, thank you." "Bethany's just finishing up inside." He nodded, studying her for a moment. "The marks are fading," he observed, gesturing vaguely toward her neck. Eleanor's hand went unconsciously to her throat. "Your sister's salve is helping." Something like anger flashed in his eyes, quickly controlled. "It shouldn't have happened in the first place." "No," she agreed softly. "But it did, and without you it would have been much worse." Before he could respond, Bethany emerged from the house carrying a small basket. "All set," she announced. "I've made a list of essentials Eleanor might need." The ride to Carson's Creek took about an hour. The small town was nestled in a valley between rolling hills, with a main street comprised of perhaps a dozen businesses. "It's not much compared to El Paso," Hank said as they approached, "but folks here mind their own business, which can be refreshing." Eleanor found herself charmed by the tiny settlement. Unlike El Paso, which had grown rapidly with the railroad, Carson's Creek retained a frontier simplicity. The general store occupied a corner of the main street, with a weathered sign proclaiming Carson's Mercantile above the door. Inside, the store smelled pleasantly of coffee, leather, and dried goods. An elderly man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. "Afternoon, Kellers," he greeted, then noticed Eleanor. "And company, welcome to Carson's Creek, miss." "Mr. Carson, this is Eleanor Blackwood," Bethany introduced. "She's staying with us for a time." "Pleasure, Miss Blackwood." The shopkeeper's eyes held curiosity but no judgment. While Bethany helped Eleanor select necessary items undergarments, a spare dress, toiletries, Hank conducted his own business, speaking quietly with Carson at the counter. "Is there a dressmaker in town?" Eleanor asked Bethany as they browsed fabric. "Mrs. Peterson does some sewing, though she's getting on in years." "Why, do you sew?" "Quite well, actually. I thought perhaps." Eleanor hesitated. "I'd like to contribute somehow to earn my keep while I'm with you." Bethany smiled. "That's kind but unnecessary. Though I wouldn't turn down help with mending. Hank's clothes especially suffer from his work." By the time they had selected their purchases, Eleanor was feeling more human than she had in days. The simple act of choosing items for herself, even with borrowed money, restored a sense of autonomy she'd feared lost forever. As Hank loaded their purchases into the wagon, a woman approached, her silk dress and elaborately styled hair marking her as somewhat out of place in the modest town. "Hank Keller," she said, her voice carrying a practiced charm. "What a pleasant surprise." Hank straightened, his expression neutral. "Miss Leeton, afternoon. Vivian, please," she corrected, laying a gloved hand on his arm. "How many times must I insist?" "At least once more, Miss Leeton," he replied with polite firmness, stepping back slightly. Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, assessing. "And who might this be?" "Eleanor Blackwood," Bethany answered before Hank could speak. "A friend staying with us." "How lovely," Vivian said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "Are you from around these parts, Miss Blackwood?" "Boston, originally," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice even. She had faced down worse than this woman's obvious territorial display. "Boston, how cosmopolitan." Vivian turned back to Hank. "You simply must bring your friend to Father's soiree next Saturday. We're celebrating the bank's expansion." "Appreciate the invitation," Hank said noncommittally. "We should be getting back before dark." "Of course," Vivian smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Until Saturday, then. Pleasure meeting you, Miss Blackwood." As they drove away from town, Eleanor couldn't help asking, "Who was that woman?" "Vivian Leeton," Bethany answered, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Daughter of Samuel Leeton, who owns the bank and about half the businesses in Carson's Creek. She's had her eye on Hank for years." "She seems determined," Eleanor observed carefully. Hank kept his eyes on the road. "Her father's determined. Vivian just follows his lead." "He wants to expand his holdings," Bethany explained. "Our ranch sits on what would be a perfect pass for the new railroad spur he's investing in. And he thinks marriage would be an easier acquisition than purchase," Eleanor guessed. Hank's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Something like that." The rest of the journey passed with lighter conversation. Bethany pointed out landmarks and shared stories of growing up on the ranch. By the time they returned home, the sun was beginning to set, painting the landscape in golden hues. That evening, after a simple supper, Eleanor sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air. The stars seemed impossibly numerous here, away from city lights. She was so absorbed in the view that she didn't hear Hank approach until he spoke. "May I join you?" she startled slightly. "Of course." He settled into the chair beside hers, offering a mug. "Coffee, thought you might want some." "Thank you." She accepted the warm drink gratefully. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the last colors faded from the sky and stars claimed their dominion. "I never thanked you properly," Eleanor said finally, "for what you did yesterday." Hank shook his head. "No thanks needed. Nevertheless, you have my gratitude." She turned to look at him directly. "Your sister told me a little about your parents, about your mother." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Bethany talks too much sometimes. She's proud of you, and she loves you. I know." His voice softened. "Just some things are better left in the past." Eleanor nodded, understanding his reticence. "What will happen to the men who tried to sell me?" "Nothing likely," Hank answered honestly. "The law's still gray on such matters, but word spreads. They'll find it harder to do business in these parts." "Not much justice in that," she observed. "No," he agreed. "But better than none." He paused. "Have you thought about what you'll do next?" Eleanor sipped her coffee, considering. "I still want to teach, but I'm not sure where or how." "Carson's Creek has no proper school," Hank said. "Some families hire tutors if they can afford it. Others just do without education entirely." The idea sparked immediately in Eleanor's mind. "Do you think there would be interest in starting a school there?" Hank's expression was thoughtful. "Might be. Towns growing slowly but surely. Families with children would welcome it, I expect." "Something to consider then," Eleanor mused, the possibility kindling hope she hadn't felt in weeks. As they continued talking, the conversation flowed more easily. Eleanor shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of her decision to become a teacher, and her journey west. Hank spoke of ranching life, the challenges and satisfactions of building something with his own hands. "It must be rewarding," she said, "creating a life so directly connected to the land." "It is," he agreed, "though hard, unforgiving sometimes." He looked out at the darkness. "But worth it. Being your own man, answering to no one but yourself and nature, there's freedom in that." "Freedom," Eleanor echoed softly. A precious thing. Their eyes met briefly in the dim light from the window, and Eleanor felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared values despite their different paths. The moment was broken by Bethany opening the door. "Are you two planning to stargaze all night? It's getting chilly," Hank stood. "Coming in now," he assured her. He offered Eleanor his hand. "Tomorrow's an early start." She accepted his assistance, noting the strength and calluses of his palm against hers. "Good night, then. And thank you for the coffee and the conversation." "Anytime," he replied, and something in his tone suggested he meant it literally. That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the unexpected turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had been facing a future of degradation and servitude. Now she was contemplating opening a school, rebuilding her life on her own terms. And underlying it all was the enigmatic presence of Hank Keller, a man who had spent a fortune to free a stranger, who worked from dawn to dusk without complaint, who clearly cherished his independence yet had welcomed her into his home without hesitation. She fell asleep wondering what tomorrow might bring, and for the first time in months, the wondering held anticipation rather than dread. Days at the Keller ranch fell into a rhythm. Eleanor insisted on contributing, helping Bethany with household tasks and learning the basics of ranch life. She discovered she had a knack for gardening, finding satisfaction in nurturing the vegetables that supplemented their meals. Her city hands toughened gradually, earning calluses that she regarded with surprising pride. A week after her arrival, while helping Bethany hang laundry on the line, Eleanor broached a subject that had been on her mind. "I've been thinking about the school idea," she began. "Would it be possible to ride into Carson's Creek again soon? I'd like to speak with some of the families there, gauge interest." Bethany secured a sheet against the breeze. "Actually, Saturday would be perfect. There's Leighton's soiree, which Hank will avoid like the plague, but most folks in town will be out and about. Will you come with me?" "I don't know anyone there." "Of course," Bethany agreed readily. "Though I suspect you'll make friends quickly enough. You have a way about you that puts people at ease." Eleanor smiled, pleased by the compliment. "It's a teacher's skill. Children don't learn well when they're intimidated." Later that day, when Hank returned from checking cattle in the southern pasture, Eleanor approached him with her plan. He listened attentively as they walked toward the barn where he needed to unsaddle his horse. "Sounds reasonable," he said when she finished. "Town could use a school. Question is funding. Leighton controls most of the money in Carson's Creek, and he's more interested in railroads than education. I thought perhaps a subscription school to start," Eleanor suggested. "Families pay a small fee per child. Once established, we could approach the town council about public funding." Hank nodded, beginning to remove his horse's tack. "Smart approach. Start small, prove the value, then expand." He glanced at her. "You've given this thought." "It keeps me awake at night," she admitted, "in a good way." "Better than the alternative," he acknowledged, understanding without her needing to explain. Eleanor reached out tentatively to stroke the horse's neck. "Would you mind if I borrowed paper to draft a proposal, something formal to present to families?" "Help yourself to whatever you need," Hank replied. "There's writing materials in the desk in the main room." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "For everything. Your generosity continues to humble me." He looked up from his task, meeting her eyes directly. "You've brought life back to this place, Eleanor." Bethany smiles more. "The garden's thriving. You're not just taking, you're giving too." The simple sincerity of his words touched her deeply. "Still, I want you to know I'm grateful." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "Noted." That evening, Eleanor worked at the small desk in the corner of the main room, drafting her proposal for the school. As the lamp burned low, Hank sat nearby in his chair by the fireplace, reading a dog-eared copy of Ivanhoe that had clearly been read many times before. The domestic tranquility of the scene struck Eleanor suddenly how quickly she had become comfortable in this home, with these people. The realization was both warming and unsettling. She had never intended to stay long, yet already she was putting down tentative roots. "You're frowning," Hank observed, glancing up from his book. "Just thinking," she replied, "about how strange life's paths can be." He marked his place with a scrap of leather and closed the book. "Regrets? No, she said quickly, then more deliberately, no, just marveling, I suppose. A month ago I couldn't have imagined this place, or you and Bethany. Now I can't quite imagine being anywhere else. Something flickered in his expression, satisfaction, perhaps, or something deeper. Good, he said simply. That's good. Saturday dawned clear and pleasant. Hank agreed to drive Eleanor and Bethany into town, though he planned to visit a neighboring ranch while they conducted their business in Carson's Creek. Avoiding Vivian Leighton, Bethany teased as they set out. Being efficient, Hank countered, though the slight quirk of his mouth betrayed his amusement. Jim Harper's got a new stallion he's willing to let me bring to our mares. Good bloodlines. Eleanor, seated beside him on the wagon bench, noticed how relaxed he seemed this morning, almost playful in his banter with Bethany. She had come to appreciate these glimpses of the man beneath the serious rancher, the dry humor, the quick intelligence, the deep-rooted kindness that never announced itself, but was evident in countless small actions. Carson's Creek was busier than on their previous visit. The bank's soiree had brought people in from outlying areas, and the main street bustled with activity. Ladies in their best dresses promenaded past shop windows, men gathered in small clusters discussing business or cattle prices, and children darted through the crowd, enjoying the festive atmosphere. Hank let them off near the general store. I'll be back by 4, he said. If you finish early, wait at Carson's. Good luck with the horse, Eleanor replied. Good luck with your school, he returned, his voice warming on the last 2 words in a way that made them feel like a shared endeavor. The day proved productive beyond Eleanor's expectations. Bethany introduced her to several families with children, and the response to her school proposal was enthusiastic. By mid-afternoon, she had provisional commitments from 8 families representing 15 children. This is wonderful, she told Bethany as they took a break, sharing lemonade at the small cafe beside the general store. With this many students to start, I can make the financials work. The real question is where, Bethany mused. You'll need a building. Mr. Carson mentioned the old meeting hall behind the church isn't used much, Eleanor said. I'm going to speak with Reverend Simmons about it. As they finished their refreshments, a shadow fell across their table. Eleanor looked up to see Vivian Leighton standing there, resplendent in a dress that must have cost more than most Carson's Creek residents earned in months. Miss Blackwood, Miss Keller, she greeted with practiced politeness. Enjoying the festivities? Very much, Bethany replied. Congratulations on the bank's expansion. Thank you. Vivian's gaze settled on Eleanor. I was so hoping you and Hank would attend our little gathering. Unfortunately, he had business elsewhere, Eleanor explained, but we've had a lovely day in town nonetheless. Yes, I heard you were speaking with families about starting a school. Vivian's tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp. Such an ambitious undertaking for a newcomer. Education benefits everyone, Eleanor replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated, indeed. Though one wonders about the wisdom of investing in such ventures in these uncertain times. Vivian adjusted her parasol. My father always says economic stability must come before such luxuries. I wouldn't consider children's education a luxury, Miss Leighton, Eleanor said, maintaining her composure despite the clear challenge. Perhaps not in Boston, Vivian conceded with a thin smile. But this is the frontier, Miss Blackwood. Priorities differ here. She glanced toward the street. Ah, I see Father looking for me. Do enjoy the rest of your day, ladies. As she walked away, Bethany let out a low whistle. Well, that was direct. The Leightons clearly see your school as competition for town resources. I expected some resistance, Eleanor admitted. But this confirms I'm on the right track. There wouldn't be opposition if there wasn't need. They continued their rounds, speaking with the Reverend about the meeting hall. He was cautiously supportive, pending approval from his church board, and visiting 2 more families on the outskirts of town. By the time they returned to the general store to meet Hank, Eleanor was tired but exhilarated. He arrived precisely at 4, looking pleased himself. Harper's stallion is magnificent, he told them as they climbed into the wagon. Agreed to terms. We'll bring our mares over next month. We've had success too, Bethany informed him. Eleanor's practically started a school already. As they drove home, Eleanor shared the details of her conversations, the commitments from families, and the potential location. Hank listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that helped clarify her plans further. "You made more progress in one day than most could in a week," he observed as they neared the ranch. "Impressive." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, warmed by his approval. "There's still much to do, though." "And I met some resistance." Leighton, his daughter, she confirmed. Rather pointed in her discouragement, Hank's jaw tightened. "That family has always believed their money entitles them to direct everyone's affairs. Don't let them deter you." "I won't," she promised. "I've faced worse obstacles than a banker's daughter." Their eyes met briefly, and the understanding that passed between them needed no words. They had both confronted injustice and refused to bow to it, a shared resilience that created a bond neither had anticipated. That night, after Bethany had retired, Eleanor found herself once again on the porch with Hank. It had become something of a ritual, these quiet conversations under the stars, where they seemed able to speak more freely than in daylight. "I've been thinking," Hank said after a comfortable silence. "The school will need supplies, books, slates, chalk." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "I've started a list. The families will provide some, but there are basics the school itself should furnish." "I've got some savings," he offered. "Not a fortune, but enough to help get things started properly." Eleanor turned to him, surprised. "Hank, you've already done so much, I couldn't accept more." "It's an investment," he clarified. "In the community, in the future." He paused. "In you." The last words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. "Thank you," she said finally. "But as an investment, not a gift, I'll repay you." He nodded, accepting her terms. "Fair enough." Another silence fell, comfortable yet charged with growing awareness. Eleanor found herself studying his profile in the dim light, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows that never quite disappeared, the quiet dignity in his bearing. "Tell me something," he said suddenly. "If El Paso hadn't gone wrong, if you were still teaching there, would you be content?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know, perhaps," she considered more carefully. "No, probably not completely. The school board was very traditional. They expected me to teach only basic reading and ciphering to the girls, preparing them for marriage rather than independent thought. It chafed. And here, with your own school, here I can teach as I believe children should be taught," she replied, conviction strengthening her voice. "Boys and girls alike, prepared for whatever future they choose." He nodded, satisfied. "Then perhaps what happened, as terrible as it was, led you somewhere you were meant to be." The idea resonated with Eleanor. "Perhaps," she agreed softly, "though I'm not sure I believe in predestined paths." "Not predestined," Hank clarified. "But sometimes the worst storms blow us to better harbors than we'd planned to sail for." The poetic nature of the statement surprised her. "You're quite the philosopher for a cattleman, Hank Keller." A rare smile transformed his face. "Many hours alone on the range gives a man time to think." "And what do you think about during those hours?" The question was more personal than she'd intended, but she didn't retract it. He looked up at the stars for a long moment. "The land, the cattle, what needs doing?" He paused. "The future, what I'm building here, who it might be for someday." The implication stirred something in Eleanor's chest, a warmth, a possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider until now. "And what do you see when you look at that future?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze returned to her, steady and clear. "It's changing," he said simply. "Every day it's changing." The words weren't a declaration, yet Eleanor felt their weight, their significance. Something was growing between them, something neither had sought but both now recognized. "It's late," she said after a moment, suddenly aware of how intimate the conversation had become. "We should probably—" "Yes," he agreed, standing and offering his hand to help her up. "Early start tomorrow." But as she took his hand, neither seemed in a hurry to release the connection. For a heartbeat, then two, they stood closer than propriety strictly allowed, the night air humming with unspoken possibilities. "Good night, Eleanor," he said finally, his voice lower than usual. "Good night, Hank," she replied, reluctantly withdrawing her hand and moving toward the door. As she prepared for bed, Eleanor acknowledged to herself what she'd been avoiding for days. She was falling in love with Hank Keller, a man who had saved her life, offered her a home, and now was helping her build a future. It was perhaps inevitable, yet also frightening in its implications. She had come west seeking independence, professional fulfillment. Romance had been far from her plans. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, Eleanor found herself wondering if perhaps both were possible: the school of her dreams and a life shared with a man whose quiet strength and inherent decency had captured her heart when she least expected it. The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Eleanor's school plan progressed rapidly, with the church board approving use of the meeting hall and more families committing to send their children. Hank made good on his offer of investment, purchasing books, slates, and other necessities from a catalog to be delivered on the next stage from San Antonio. Eleanor divided her time between preparations for the school and continuing to help around the ranch. She had grown comfortable with the rhythm of ranch life, rising early, working hard through the day, enjoying simple but satisfying meals, and retiring tired but content. She also found herself growing closer to Hank. Their evening conversations continued, gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Eleanor learned of his dreams for expanding the ranch, breeding finer cattle, perhaps eventually building a larger house. Hank, in turn, listened to her ideas about education, her passion for opening minds to possibilities beyond the frontier's limitations. They were careful to maintain proprieties, especially in Bethany's presence, but both were aware of the deepening connection between them. Occasional touches, a hand helping her into the wagon, fingers brushing while passing a dish at dinner, sent currents of awareness through Eleanor that both thrilled and unnerved her. One afternoon in late July, nearly a month after her arrival at the ranch, Eleanor was working in the garden when she heard riders approaching. Looking up, she saw 3 men on horseback coming down the road toward the house. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as Bethany emerged from the house. Hank was checking fencing on the far side of the property and wasn't expected back for hours. "Do you recognize them?" Eleanor asked quietly as Bethany joined her. "No," Bethany replied, her voice tense. "And they're riding like they own the place." As the riders drew closer, Eleanor felt a chill of recognition. The man in the lead was the auctioneer from El Paso. Beside him rode the sheriff who had arrested her, and the third man she didn't know. "Get inside," Bethany urged, but it was too late. The riders had spotted them and were cantering up to the yard. Well, the auctioneer called out, reining in his horse. "If it isn't the Boston schoolmarm, fancy meeting you here." Eleanor stood her ground, though her heart raced. "What do you want, Mr. Barton?" "Just to right a wrong, madam," the sheriff replied, touching his hat in mock politeness. "You see, that auction was legal and binding. Your friend Mr. Keller may have paid for you, but he had no right to set you free. You're still contracted to work off Haynes' debt." "That's ridiculous," Bethany interjected. "She's a free woman. You can't possibly enforce such a claim." The third man, better dressed than his companions, spoke up. "Actually, miss, I'm Judge Wesley from El Paso County. I've reviewed the documentation and the debt remains legally binding. Miss Blackwood either returns to fulfill her contract or faces charges of theft, stealing herself, as it were." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "This is absurd. You know very well that such contracts violate federal law." "The courts in Texas see it differently," the judge replied smoothly. "Now you can come peacefully, or we can wait for Mr. Keller and have a more complicated discussion." "She's not going anywhere," Bethany declared, stepping forward. "My brother paid your blood money. The matter is settled." The auctioneer dismounted, his hand resting meaningfully on the pistol at his hip. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, after your brother's little display, business has been difficult in El Paso. Word spread, questions were asked. We need to make an example to restore confidence in the system." Eleanor realized with sickening clarity that this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about power and saving face. These men couldn't allow her freedom to stand unchallenged. "Let me get my things," she said quietly. "I won't cause trouble." "Eleanor, no," Bethany protested. "I won't bring danger to your home," Eleanor replied firmly. "They won't hurt me. I'm worth more to them intact." She turned to the men. "Give me 10 minutes to pack," the judge nodded, Reasonable, but don't try anything foolish. Inside the house, Bethany followed Eleanor to her room. We need to stall until Hank returns, she whispered urgently. He'll know what to do. And what if someone gets hurt? Eleanor demanded, pulling her few possessions together. These men are armed and desperate. I won't risk your lives. So you'll just surrender? Bethany's voice cracked with emotion. After everything? Eleanor paused, meeting her friend's eyes. No, I'll go with them for now, but this isn't over. Can you get word to Carson's Creek, to the Reverend, or anyone who might help? Bethany nodded slowly. As soon as they leave with you, but Eleanor, Hank will come for you, you know that. I'm counting on it, Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Tell him I went willingly to prevent violence here. Tell him I'm sorry we didn't have more time. The last part slipped out unbidden, revealing more than she'd intended. Bethany's expression softened with understanding. He feels the same, you know, she said quietly. He's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. The knowledge brought both pain and determination to Eleanor's heart. She finished packing quickly, then wrote a short note which she pressed into Bethany's hand. Give this to Hank, she instructed. It explains what happened and where they're taking me. Outside, the men were growing impatient. The sheriff had dismounted and was pacing the yard, while the judge and auctioneer remained mounted, watching the house. Time's up, Miss Blackwood, the judge called. Eleanor emerged, small bag in hand. I'm ready. The sheriff grabbed her arm roughly, guiding her toward his horse. You'll ride with me. Try anything and you'll regret it. I've given my word, Eleanor replied coldly. Unlike some, I consider it binding. As the sheriff helped her mount in front of him, Eleanor caught a final glimpse of Bethany standing on the porch, her face a mask of worry and determination. Then the riders turned their horses, and they were galloping away from the only place Eleanor had felt truly safe in months. They rode hard for several hours, following back trails rather than the main road to El Paso. Eleanor surmised they were avoiding Carson's Creek and other settlements where questions might be asked about a woman clearly traveling under duress. By nightfall, they had reached a small cabin in a wooded area Eleanor didn't recognize. The men dismounted, the sheriff practically dragging her from the horse. Home for tonight, the auctioneer announced. We'll reach El Paso by tomorrow evening. Inside, the cabin was sparse but serviceable, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough table, and 2 narrow beds. Eleanor was directed to sit in a straight-backed chair while the men built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. Why are you really doing this? She asked the judge as he checked the cabin's single window. You must know this won't stand legal scrutiny outside of Texas. He glanced at her, his expression calculating. It's not about you, Miss Blackwood. It's about precedent. If we allow contracts to be broken without consequences, the entire economic system falters. You mean your power falters, she corrected. Systems built on exploitation should falter. The judge's eyes hardened. Careful. Your situation can become considerably more uncomfortable if you persist with such talk. Eleanor fell silent, recognizing the threat but storing the exchange in her memory. If when she had her day in a proper court, such attitudes would be revealing. As night deepened, the men took turns standing watch. Eleanor was permitted to lie on one of the beds, though her wrists were tied to the frame loose enough for comfort but secure enough to prevent escape. Sleep came in fitful bursts. Each time she woke, Eleanor's thoughts turned to Hank. Would he have returned to the ranch by now? What would he do when he learned what had happened? The idea of him riding alone into danger because of her filled her with dread. Yet the alternative remaining in these men's custody was unthinkable. Dawn broke with gray light filtering through the cabin's dirty window. The auctioneer, who had taken the last watch, kicked the sheriff awake. Time to move, he growled. Want to make the border crossing by noon. They provided Eleanor with hardtack and water barely enough to sustain her, but she ate without complaint, knowing she would need her strength. As they prepared to depart, she noticed the men seemed tense, constantly checking the surrounding forest. Expecting company, she asked mildly. Just being cautious, the judge replied. Your friend Keller has a reputation. The acknowledgement that they feared Hank brought Eleanor a spark of hope. These men might have legal documents and badges, but they knew they were in the wrong, and that knowledge made them vulnerable. They set out as the sun cleared the horizon, riding at a brisk pace through increasingly rugged terrain. Eleanor, again mounted with the sheriff, tried to memorize landmarks, though the unfamiliar landscape made it difficult. Around mid-morning, they paused at a stream to water the horses. Eleanor was allowed to stretch her legs under the sheriff's watchful eye. "You're making a mistake," she told him quietly as they stood apart from the others. "Whatever they're paying you, it's not worth the trouble that's coming." The sheriff spat into the dirt. "Big talk from a woman in your position." "I know Hank Keller," she continued, undeterred. "He won't stop coming for me, and when he finds us when do you think these flimsy legal pretexts will matter?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed the sheriff's face before he masked it with bravado. "Keller's just one man. We're three, all armed." "He won't be alone," Eleanor said, praying she was right. "And unlike you, he'll be fighting for something that matters." The sheriff roughly grabbed her arm. "That's enough talk, back to the horses." But as he pulled her away from the stream, a shot rang out, kicking up dirt at their feet. Everyone froze. "That's far enough," called a voice Eleanor recognized instantly. "Hank." The men drew their weapons, spinning to locate the source of the voice. Eleanor used the momentary distraction to wrench free of the sheriff's grip and dive for the cover of nearby rocks. "Show yourself, Keller," the judge demanded, his pistol sweeping the tree line. "Not until Miss Blackwood is clear," Hank replied, his voice seemingly coming from a different direction now. "You're surrounded. This can end one of two ways." A second shot cracked through the air, this one knocking the judge's hat from his head. The man yelped, dropping to a crouch. "That's impossible," the auctioneer hissed. "He couldn't have circled us that fast." "It's not just him," came another voice, one Eleanor didn't recognize. "Drop your weapons, now." Eleanor peered carefully around her rocky shelter. From the trees emerged several figures: Reverend Simmons from Carson's Creek, Mr. Carson the shopkeeper, and two other men she had met briefly in town. All were armed, their expressions grimly determined. Hank finally revealed himself, stepping from behind a large boulder with his rifle trained on the sheriff. His eyes found Eleanor, briefly confirming she was unharmed before returning to the threat. "This is your last warning," he said, his voice carrying the stillness of absolute certainty. "Drop your weapons." The judge was the first to comply, perhaps recognizing the futility of their position. The auctioneer followed reluctantly. Only the sheriff hesitated, his pistol still drawn. "You're interfering with officers of the law, Keller," he blustered. "This woman is legally bound. No person can be legally bound to another," Hank interrupted, echoing his words from the auction platform. "The war settled that. The courts, I don't care what corrupt judges in El Paso say," Hank cut him off again. "This ends here. Now drop your gun before I decide you're not worth the bullet." Something in his tone, the cold certainty, perhaps finally penetrated the sheriff's bravado. He carefully placed his pistol on the ground. "Eleanor," Hank called, not taking his eyes off the men. "Come to me." She emerged from her shelter, moving quickly to Hank's side. Only when she reached him did he allow his focus to shift momentarily, his eyes searching hers. "Are you hurt?" "No," she assured him. "I'm all right." He nodded once, relief briefly softening his expression before he turned back to the captive men. "Reverend, if you'd be so kind as to secure these gentlemen." Reverend Simmons and the others moved forward with ropes, binding the men's hands behind their backs. The judge began to protest about legal repercussions, but Mr. Carson silenced him with a disgusted look. "Save it for someone who doesn't know you, Wesley. We've heard about your debt contracts from traders passing through. The federal marshal in San Antonio is mighty interested too." Eleanor looked at Hank questioningly. He explained in a low voice, "Bethany rode for Carson's Creek as soon as they took you. I was already on my way home and met her on the road. We gathered help and tracked you through the night." "Thank you," she whispered, emotion making it difficult to say more. His hand found hers, squeezing briefly. "I told you once, never again. I meant it." With the three men secured, the group prepared to return to Carson's Creek. The judge, auctioneer, and sheriff were mounted on their own horses with their hands tied to the saddle horns. Hank helped Eleanor onto his horse, then mounted behind her, much as they had ridden that first day from El Paso. As they set out, Eleanor leaned back slightly against Hank's chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "What will happen to them?" she asked. "They'll face a federal judge," he replied. "Mr. Carson sent a telegram to the marshal in San Antonio before we left town. Should arrive tomorrow or the next day." He paused. "With luck, this will put an end to their debt contracts permanently, and me, will I have to testify? Probably, but not alone." His arms tightened slightly around her. "I won't let you face this alone, Eleanor." The simple promise carried weight far beyond the immediate situation. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to fully feel the security of his protection, the rightness of being in his arms. "I left a note," she said after a while. "For you, did Bethany." "She gave it to me," he confirmed. "It helped us track you faster, knowing their probable route." His voice lowered, but it was the last part that mattered most. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, remembering what she'd written in those final lines, words too honest, too revealing, penned in a moment when she feared she might never see him again. "I meant it," she said softly. "Every word." He was silent for a moment, then bent his head closer to her ear. "When we get home, when this is finished, we'll talk. Properly." The promise in those simple words carried Eleanor through the long ride back to Carson's Creek, where the prisoners were secured in the town's small jail to await the federal marshal. Reverend Simmons insisted on returning to town with them as a witness, while Mr. Carson and the other men volunteered to stand guard in shifts. By late afternoon, Eleanor and Hank were finally able to return to the ranch, where Bethany was waiting anxiously on the porch. She ran to meet them as they rode in, her face alight with relief. "Thank God," she exclaimed as Hank helped Eleanor dismount. "I've been worried sick." Eleanor embraced her friend tightly. "I'm fine, thanks to you and your brother." "Don't thank me yet," Bethany replied, wiping away tears. "I've barely slept, the house is a mess, and dinner isn't even started." "Then it's fortunate I know how to cook," Eleanor said with a tired smile, "though I might need to wash first." Bethany laughed, linking her arm through Eleanor's as they walked toward the house. "Bath's already drawn." "I had faith you'd be back." Later, cleaned and dressed in fresh clothes, Eleanor found herself once again sitting on the porch as evening approached. The events of the past 24 hours felt almost dreamlike, yet the lingering tension in her body reminded her it had been all too real. The door opened behind her and Hank emerged, freshly washed himself, his hair still damp. He held 2 steaming mugs. "Tea this time," he said, offering one to her. "Bethany's idea, says it's more soothing." "She may be right," Eleanor agreed, accepting the mug gratefully. "Though I'm not sure anything will help me sleep tonight." Hank settled beside her, closer than usual. "Nightmares, perhaps," she admitted, "or just processing everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The tea was sweet and fragrant with herbs from Bethany's garden. "You said we would talk," Eleanor reminded him gently. "When we got home." Hank set his mug aside, turning to face her more directly. "I did." He took a deep breath. "I'm not good with words, Eleanor, not like you, but I need to try." She waited, giving him the space to find his way. "When I saw you on that auction platform, something in me broke open," he began slowly. "Not just because of my mother's history, though that was part of it. But because seeing you there, someone so clearly meant for better things, it was like watching the whole broken world in miniature." He looked down at his hands, then back to her face. "I didn't expect what came after, how you'd fit here. How seeing you in the garden or at the table would feel like the most natural thing in the world, how much I'd come to." He paused, searching for the right word. "Need you," he finally said. "Want you, in my life, in my future." Eleanor's heart beat faster. "Hank." "Let me finish," he requested gently. "When Bethany gave me your note and I read those last lines, about wishing we'd had more time, I realized time is the one thing I can give you now, as much as you want, if you want it." He reached for her hand, cradling it between both of his. "I love you, Eleanor. I think I started falling the moment I cut that rope from your neck, and if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you. The school, the ranch, all of it, together." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, emotion too powerful for words rising in her throat. Instead of speaking, She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as Hank responded, one hand moving to cup her face with exquisite gentleness. When they finally parted, Eleanor found her voice. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "And yes, yes to time, yes to a future, yes to everything." His smile, wider and more unguarded than she had ever seen, was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her close again, his kiss more confident now, filled with promise and certainty. The sound of the door opening caused them to separate quickly, though Hank kept hold of Eleanor's hand. Bethany stood in the doorway, looking not at all surprised to find them so close. "Dinner's ready," she announced, barely suppressing a smile, "if you two can tear yourselves away from your conversation." Hank cleared his throat, a faint flush visible on his tan cheeks. "We'll be right in." After Bethany disappeared back inside, he turned to Eleanor once more. "I should do this properly," he said, with a ring on one knee. "There will be time for that," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "We have all the time in the world now." "Yes," he agreed, helping her to her feet. "We do." The federal marshal arrived in Carson's Creek 2 days later. After hearing testimony from Eleanor, Hank, and several townspeople, he formally arrested the judge, sheriff, and auctioneer on multiple charges, including unlawful detention, fraud, and civil rights violations. They would face trial in San Antonio, where federal laws against forced servitude would be strictly enforced. The marshal also issued a formal declaration confirming Eleanor's status as a free citizen, putting to rest any lingering legal questions about the El Paso debt contract. With that shadow lifted, Eleanor threw herself into preparations for opening her school. The meeting hall was cleaned and furnished with simple desks crafted by the town carpenter. Books and supplies arrived from San Antonio. By mid-August, everything was ready. On the day before the school's opening, Hank took Eleanor for a ride to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. As they dismounted to enjoy the view, he seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I wanted to do this right." Eleanor's breath caught as he went down on one knee before her, opening the pouch to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. "Eleanor Blackwood," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was tender, full of promise and shared dreams. "It was my mother's," he explained when they finally parted. "My father gave it to her when they reached Texas, their first step on free soil." "It's perfect," Eleanor said, deeply moved by the significance. "I'll cherish it always." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Carson's Creek Church. Reverend Simmons officiated, with Bethany standing proudly as Eleanor's attendant. The entire town turned out to celebrate, including all 15 of Eleanor's new students and their families. Even Samuel Leighton attended, though his daughter was notably absent. The banker approached the couple at the reception, his manner more conciliatory than Eleanor had expected. "Congratulations," he said, offering his hand to Hank. "And my apologies for any misunderstandings regarding your school, Mrs. Keller." He nodded to Eleanor. "The town council has voted to provide public funding starting next year. It seems you've won over the community quite thoroughly." "Thank you, Mr. Leighton," Eleanor replied gracefully. "I look forward to working with the council to ensure all Carson's Creek's children receive the education they deserve." As the banker moved away, Hank leaned close to his new wife's ear. "Impressive. You've managed what no one else has, making Samuel Leighton back down." "Not backing down," she corrected with a smile. "Just recognizing mutual interests. His grandchildren will need education too someday." Hank laughed, the sound still rare enough to draw pleased glances from nearby guests. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, her eyes sparkling, "but I wouldn't object to hearing it again." In the months and years that followed, Eleanor and Hank built the life they had envisioned together. The school flourished, eventually moving to a purpose-built building on Carson's Creek's Main Street. The ranch prospered too, with Hank's careful breeding program producing cattle sought after throughout the territory. Bethany found love with Jim Harper, the neighboring rancher whose stallion had inadvertently brought her brother and Eleanor back together that fateful day. Their wedding the following spring was another joyous occasion for the growing community. A year after their marriage, Eleanor gave birth to their first child, a son they named Jacob, after Hank's father. 2 years later came a daughter, Margaret, named for Eleanor's mother. Both children grew up surrounded by love, learning both the practical skills of ranch life and the academic knowledge their mother valued so highly. On the 5th anniversary of the day Hank had cut the rope from Eleanor's neck, they stood together on the porch of their home, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold. "Do you ever wonder," Eleanor asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder, "what might have happened if you hadn't been in El Paso that day, if you hadn't come to the auction?" Hank's arm tightened around her waist. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built, the school, the ranch, our family, and I can only be grateful for whatever twist of fate brought us together. Even though it began with something so terrible. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the harshest soil," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What matters is what we've made from it." From inside came the sound of children's laughter as Bethany entertained her niece and nephew. The cattle lowed softly in the distance, settling for the night. And as darkness fell, the first stars appeared above Hank and Eleanor Keller's home, a home built on courage, justice, and a love that had begun with 5 simple words: never again.